Have you ever stumbled upon something so terrifying online that it makes you question reality itself? Imagine this: you're browsing Reddit late at night, alone in your room, and you come across a post that makes your blood run cold. Could these stories actually be true? Or are they just the twisted creations of an overactive imagination? Well, tonight we're diving deep into the darkest corners of Reddit to uncover the top 3 most disturbing horror stories. Stories that will leave you with chills long after the screen goes dark. But before we start, have you ever felt like you were being watched when no one was there? My name is Besser. I've always been a man of many faces, a master of disguise, and a thief with a complicated past. An ex once said my life teeters on the edge of legality, an intricate dance of survival and deceit, all wrapped around a heart of gold. Sounds about right. I have a knack for finding trouble, or maybe trouble has a knack for finding me sometimes. It's hard to say which came first. But on this particular night, as the rain hammered against the pavement, trouble came in the form of a cryptic text message. The words were simple: "We have one." I continued my journey into a dingy bodega, the kind of place that attracts both lost souls and shady late-night characters. The owner, a wiry man, cast a suspicious glance in my direction as I entered. I was used to it. We exchanged a few vague words, and I left with a pack of cigarettes, my mind elsewhere. The rain intensified as I made my way to, of all places, the morgue. Inside the bright yellow front door, I found nobody. I sat, waited, almost finding solace in the silence of the deceased, until a man beckoned me through another door. In the back room, 2 strangers awaited me, their faces tinged with anticipation. The men said their names were Dr. Ramirez and Dr. Martin. Were those their real names? Probably not. In the middle of the room, a barber's chair caught my attention, its many attached wires and devices a chaotic mess, or maybe a puzzle. The wires, leading behind a curtain, were arranged in a way that didn't exactly scream FDA approval. Ramirez noticed my curiosity about what was behind the curtain and offered, "Do you want to take a look?" I grimaced instantly. "Nope. No emotional attachments. I don't need to know anything about it." My attention drifted just long enough for me to mutter, "500, right?" "Yeah," Martin replied. I pulled a dog-eared wad of cash from my coat pocket, counted it, and tossed it toward the 2 white coats. In the dimly lit room, I settled into the cold, metal chair. The air had the sharp scent of formaldehyde, a chilling reminder of exactly where we were. Ramirez and Martin positioned themselves at my side, their expressions barely hiding their cautious excitement. "This is painless, right?" I confirmed. "The transference should be instant and mild, maybe a light static shock," Ramirez assured me. The machine loomed before us, a marvel of backyard scientific ingenuity. Dr. Ramirez adjusted his spectacles with trembling hands as he prepared the apparatus. "Are you ready, Mr. Besser?" His voice quivered with a mixture of trepidation. I nodded, trying to keep my heart from thumping so loudly it would give me away. The machine hummed to life, its mechanical screech blending with the pattering rain and the rumble of thunder outside. Electrodes were attached to my temples, sending tiny jolts of electricity through my veins. My vision blurred, and reality faded into a whirlpool of darkness. And then, with a surge of energy, I was transported into another world. Colors exploded around me, vibrant, clear. I found myself standing in a bustling city square, neon signs casting an otherworldly glow. The memories of another person flooded my senses, a wave of emotions and experiences. I was no longer Steve Besser, the petty thief with a troubled past. In this strange fusion of 2 minds, I became someone else entirely. Unfamiliar faces flickered in and out of focus, their voices fragmented whispers. But I could taste their bitterness, feel the warmth of an embrace, and smell the stench of their fear. Through the eyes of this other person, I saw a life teeming with affluence. A large penthouse apartment on Park Avenue, packed with extravagance now unguarded. Then, like a bolt of lightning, I jolted back into consciousness, my body drenched in sweat. Ramirez and Martin stood over me, watching intently, their eyes somehow filled with both awe and concern. The memory transference had given me a glimpse into another person's world. "Everything okay?" Ramirez confirmed. I was speechless, still absorbing what had just happened, but I sat up and nodded as Martin removed the electrodes. "All that was from him?" I asked, pointing behind the curtain. Ramirez sheepishly nodded. "How many times have you done this?" "Actually, don't tell me," I muttered as I got to my feet. "You'll be able to access the memories like your own, but stimuli help speed up the process. Here's the deceased's information. Once you're a few blocks away, the instincts should kick in," Martinez instructed. "And him?" I motioned to the body behind the curtain. "He won't go anywhere," Martinez grinned. In the heart of the affluent Park Avenue district, I approached the luxury apartment building from my visions. The fancy facade and opulent surroundings contrasted sharply with the shadows hanging over my own life. But I didn't let that distract me. I needed to focus. As I neared the entrance, the visions started to overlap with my own sight, swirling like a road map in my mind. I saw myself, dressed in a tailored suit, walking toward the doorman with an air of confidence. Mirroring the vision, I confidently said, "Grant." As I passed the towering figure, he gave me a respectful nod, just as I expected. With the visions guiding me, I approached the porter, my movements smooth and calculated. "Good evening, Barry," I greeted him, echoing the memory. His eyes warmed ever so slightly, something about me triggering a vague sense of familiarity. With a curt nod, he gestured for me to continue. I stepped into the grand lobby, my adrenaline rising with the thrill of the heist. In the elevator, I pulled out a set of lockpicks from my pocket, feeling the weight of each tool. Level 15. The vision guided me like a compass, and I marched down the hall, my instinct leading the way. When I reached the door, I manipulated the tumblers. The lock yielded with a soft click. Once inside, my gaze swept across the lavish interior. I pulled out a handheld metal detector, a trusted companion on jobs like this. With a flick of a switch, it hummed to life, beeping faintly whenever it detected gold. Methodically, I moved through the rooms, my gloved hand plucking golden trinkets from display cases and tabletops. Each piece was swiftly stowed away in my trusty backpack. Then, a golden family photo frame caught my eye. Handling it with care, I gently removed the photo and placed it on the desk. The frame, a valuable branded piece, found its way into my bag. My attention was suddenly drawn to a key lying in the middle of the coffee table. It was just an ordinary old door key, but something about it demanded my attention. I picked it up, examining it closely. Aside from a red dot of nail polish, it held no real unique mystery. I placed it back on the table, as I decided I'd spent enough time in harm's way. But just as I prepared to make my exit, the sound of the front doorknob turning sent a jolt through me. My heart skipped a beat as the door creaked open. A young woman, her expression was of total confusion, stepped into the apartment. The beam from my headlamp cast a harsh light on her as I froze, caught red-handed. The woman froze. I, however, tried to remain composed, my mind racing to find the perfect cover. Without missing a beat, I slipped into the persona of a maintenance worker. "Apologies for the intrusion, ma'am," I said, keeping my tone calm and authoritative. "I'm here investigating a reported power outage. Seems I found the problem. It should be resolved shortly." Her initial shock started to fade, my words reassuring her. She hesitated for a moment before offering a tentative smile. "Well, thank you for taking care of it," she replied, still a bit uncertain but clearly comforted by my confidence. "All in a day's work, ma'am," I said, making my exit before her suspicion could resurface. Rain poured relentlessly over the streets of New York, turning the pavement into a slick, treacherous obstacle course. I stepped out of a pawn shop, navigating the narrow alleys with ease as the city's towering skyscrapers loomed above like watchful giants. In the heart of this soaked urban jungle, a dilapidated bar provided a much-needed refuge. The neon sign flickered weakly, casting faint light onto the wet sidewalk. I pushed open the door, entering a haze of dim lighting and the low hum of whiskey-soaked conversations. The pungent scent of stale smoke lingered in the air, exactly the kind of place I could lose myself in for a while. Maggie, the barmaid with a knowing smile and eyes framed by smoky eyeliner, greeted me with a nod. Without a word, she poured me a whiskey, sliding the glass across the worn bar. As the rain continued its assault outside, I found solace in Maggie's company and the Mets game playing on the TV. We talked, sharing fragments of our lives, our hopes, and the burdens we carried. My words flowed like the rain hitting the window, slowly and steadily. I confided in her about my foster father, the man who had raised me and now sat trapped in the fog of Alzheimer's. The mounting medical bills, the weight of his care, and the strain it placed on my meager earnings had driven me deeper into the perilous world of thievery. Maggie moved gracefully down the bar, serving drinks while I let my gaze wander aimlessly until it landed on an oil painting hanging on the wall. It was an idyllic scene. A house with a bright yellow door nestled in suburbia, surrounded by perfectly manicured lawns and white picket fences. The simplicity of the image stirred something in me, a momentary break from the weight of everything on my shoulders. I stared at the painting for a moment, letting it calm my mind, before finishing my drink and gathering my things to leave. On my way home, I always found myself drawn to the edge of a particular pier, standing in the cold night air and gazing out across the dark water. My eyes fixated on a towering bridge in the distance, its long, arching span connecting two distant worlds on either side of the bay. For reasons I couldn't explain, the bridge commanded my attention, its silhouette etched against the horizon like a beacon. I had no idea why I felt such a strange pull toward it, but something about it wouldn't let me look away. A cool breeze swept in from the water, ruffling my hair as I stood there, lost in thought. I knew I should be heading home, but I couldn't tear my gaze from the bridge, as if it held some kind of meaning just beyond my grasp. Finally, I forced myself to turn away, that strange sense of purpose pushing me toward home. When I arrived at my apartment, I found my foster father sitting on the couch, staring blankly at the TV. I sat down beside him, watching as his labored breaths filled the room, a painful reminder of the disease's relentless grip. Each breath was a testament to the slow, inevitable march toward the end, and I felt the weight of it pressing down on me. I sat there silently as the rain continued to pour outside, knowing there was nothing I could do to stop it. I approached the fridge and grabbed a beer, feeling the cold bottle in my hand as I noticed the near-empty bottle of my father's medication. I couldn't help but let out a sigh. Does it ever end? The next few days passed with the same somber routine, tending to my foster father, watching over him as his condition worsened. The weight of responsibility pressed down on me, but I couldn't shake it. It was my duty. In the back of my mind, I was desperate for a way out of this life. I searched for honest work, something that would pull me out of the cycle of crime. But every door I knocked on seemed to slam in my face, my criminal record shadowing me like an unshakable curse. I found myself in a pristine white office one afternoon, staring at the final hurdle, an interview for a decent job, a chance for a fresh start. The tension in the air was evident to all, and as the interviewer read over my resume, I knew the question was coming, the one that always came. "Mr. Besser, could you please explain the incident on your record?" The interviewer's tone was polite, but I could hear the judgment in their voice. "It's a red flag for us." I took a breath, steadying myself. "That was a mistake," I said, my voice low and steady. "It was born out of loyalty. A friend was in trouble, and I thought I was doing the right thing. It was a bad call, but I believed in protecting the people I cared about, no matter the cost." Silence filled the room, thick with unspoken doubts. The interviewer's gaze wavered as if searching for a reason to believe me, but in the end, they couldn't. "I'm sorry, Mr. Besser," they said, their voice flat. "While we appreciate your honesty, we can't overlook the incident. We're going to have to withdraw our offer." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I stood, shoulders slumped under the weight of yet another rejection, and made my way out of the office. Outside, the rain poured relentlessly, matching the sinking feeling inside me. But I wasn't done. Defeat wasn't an option, not today. I found myself in a back alley later, the graffiti-covered walls closing in on me as I met with a dealer. The transaction was quick. A few words exchanged, a small wad of cash passed from my hand to his. In return, he gave me what I needed. Just as I turned to leave, a group appeared at the mouth of the alley. My pulse quickened, but I didn't break stride. I walked toward them, pretending not to care, but as I got closer, my instincts kicked in. I could sense trouble. "Look what we got here," one of the punks sneered, stepping into my path, blocking any chance of escape. "Think you can come to our turf and score some gear?" Panic surged through me. I tried to explain, to reason with them, but my words drowned beneath the sound of their threats. Before I knew it, fists and kicks rained down on me. I hit the ground hard, my world spinning, the drugs scattered across the slick pavement, forgotten in the chaos. One of the goons bent down, picked up the bottle and scoffed, "Old man shit." They finally strutted away, satisfied with their display, leaving me beaten and bruised on the wet asphalt. Slowly, I forced myself to my knees, then to my feet, ignoring the sharp pain coursing through my body. I scrambled to collect the scattered pills, my hands trembling. That's when I saw it, something strange. A key. Sitting right there amongst the pill packets was the key from the apartment, with its unmistakable red dot of nail polish. The same key I had left behind. How the hell did it end up here? Too sore to care at that moment. I grabbed the last of the pills and left the key where it lay. The walk home felt like it lasted forever. Limping through the dark streets, soaked and aching, I somehow made it back. I paused outside my apartment, wiped the rain from my face, and entered. Inside, my foster father sat in his usual spot, his cloudy eyes lighting up as he recognized me. "I'm sorry I got caught in the rain," I lied, trying to muster a smile. "But I've got something for you, something that'll help." His face softened as I handed him the package. I couldn't bear to tell him the truth, not after everything. "Your doctor said this should make things better, I promised." He nodded, his gratitude simple and quiet, unaware of the lengths I had gone to for him. Later, I found myself back at Maggie's bar, staring into the depths of my whiskey glass. The choices, the failures, the endless spiral I seemed trapped in. How many more drinks would it take to numb the pain? Just then, my phone buzzed with a message. "We have another one." I left the warmth of the bar, stepping back into the cold streets. The neon lights of the city flickered on, casting a pale glow on the wet pavement. Somewhere deep inside me, a flicker of hope sparked. I wasn't sure how or when, but I was determined to find a way to rise above this mess, to carve out something better. But for now, I had to work with what I had. I returned to the morgue, where Ramirez and Martin awaited me. The room was still dim, cold, but familiar. I slid into the metal chair, my body tense but ready. The hum of the machine filled the silence. "You sure you're ready for this?" Ramirez asked, adjusting his glasses. I nodded. There wasn't really a choice anymore. The machine came to life, its hum growing louder. Electrodes pressed against my temples, sending that familiar jolt through my body. My vision blurred again as reality dissolved into a swirling haze. Then, with a surge of energy, I was somewhere else. Colors burst around me, vibrant and intense, until I found myself standing in a bustling cityscape. Neon lights bathed everything in a strange, surreal glow. I wondered where I'd land this time, but soon the vision sharpened. I stepped out into the street, my surroundings eerily similar to what I had just seen in the transference. Plush furniture, tasteful artwork, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the skyline. Every detail lined up with the vision. Following a trail only my subconscious seemed to know, I walked through the dark streets, guided by some unseen force. Step by step, the apartment's layout came back to me. The streetlights cast shadows that mirrored the high-rise windows from my vision. I could feel it. This was where I needed to be. I had no idea what awaited me inside, but I knew one thing for sure. This was far from over. An inexplicable sense of déjà vu washed over me as I turned the corner and found myself standing before a large bridge. I stopped, the sight of it filling me with a familiar knot of anxiety. The sound of the rushing water below echoed in my ears, triggering memories I couldn't fully grasp. but felt deep in my bones. My feet felt like they were glued to the pavement, leaving me paralyzed with fear. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. My palms were slick with sweat as I gripped the cold railings for support. I knew deep down that I needed to cross this bridge to get to whatever lay beyond it. But something inside me hesitated. It was as if the water itself was calling out to my fear, taunting me. I forced one foot forward, trying to block out the churning river below. The bridge creaked under the weight of my steps, and every sound sent a shiver down my spine. My throat tightened, making it hard to breathe. I glanced down at the water again. Bad move. My heart raced even faster. The vast expanse of the river felt like an insurmountable obstacle, reflecting the helplessness I felt in confronting my fears. Images flashed through my mind, quick and sharp. Me leaping into the bay, the cold, dark waters swallowing me whole. I shook my head, trying to push the thoughts aside, but they clung to me. I couldn't afford to freeze like this. I had to cross the bridge, but every step made my legs feel heavier. Doubt gnawed at me, whispering that I wasn't strong enough to overcome this. In the end, the fear won out. I took a step back, retreating from the bridge. Not today. I wouldn't reach whatever was on the other side. As I walked away, frustration and disappointment washed over me. I knew I'd have to confront this fear eventually, but today wasn't the day. The morning sun streamed through the curtains, its warmth coaxing me awake. I rubbed my eyes, the remnants of last night's memories, someone else's life, still clinging to me like a fog. As I stretched and tried to make sense of it all, something on the bedside table caught my eye. There it was, the mysterious key. The same one I'd seen in the apartment and later in the alley, now sitting right next to my things, as if it had always been there. Its surface gleamed in the soft morning light, and the small red dot of nail polish at the top confirmed my suspicion. It was the same key. I reached for it, my mind buzzing with questions. How had the key found its way here? Who had marked it with that distinctive red dot? The memories from the last transference were still fresh, and I couldn't shake the feeling that this key was somehow tied to everything. As I held it in my hands, I felt an odd connection to it, like it held the answer to more than just a door. But for now, I had more pressing concerns. My father's medication, it was running out again. I checked the countless pillboxes scattered across the kitchen counter, but almost all were empty. The anxiety I'd felt earlier on the bridge returned, this time tied to the endless struggle to afford the medication that kept my father going. I got dressed quickly, my mind a mess. Morning, son. Sleep well. My father greeted me with his usual smile as I stepped into the small kitchen. Morning, I replied, forcing a smile of my own. I didn't want to worry him with my own problems. I slept all right. I've got to head out, but I'll be back later. Okay. With the prescription in hand, I left the apartment, my thoughts clouded by the need to find a solution. There was only one place I could think of, the morgue. I knocked on the metal door hard and waited. Eventually, Dr. Ramirez answered. "Is there any chance I could get another transfer today?" I asked, trying to keep the pleading edge out of my voice. The doctor hesitated, glancing away. "We don't have any new transferences available right now. We're still vetting candidates." I didn't have time to wait. "I'll take anything you've got," I said, almost begging. "I'll make it work." Dr. Ramirez looked at me for a long moment. Finally, he nodded. "All right, I do have one available, but I have to warn you. We don't know much about this one's memories." I nodded. "I'll take it." Whatever it was, I had to believe it would help. I didn't have the luxury of being picky. The doctor led me to the transfer chair, and I took a seat, the cold metal beneath me already familiar. Dr. Ramirez began preparing the equipment, his hands moving methodically, but I could sense an underlying hesitation. As the transfer started, I felt myself slipping away, sinking into the depths of another consciousness. Faces flickered in front of me, disjointed, blurry, being pulled from the recesses of a distant, half-forgotten life. A house appeared in the middle of it all, white picket fence, clean-cut grass. It looked like something from an idyllic family sitcom, but something about it felt wrong. Unlike my previous transfers, this one was tainted. The memories were twisted, vibrant on the surface but threaded with an unsettling darkness beneath. A nagging unease settled deep within me, like a toxin spreading through my veins. I knew this place. I knew the people in it, but the familiarity only deepened the confusion. I struggled to piece together the fragmented images bombarding my senses, but nothing made sense. The sensations were too real. They weren't just echoes of another life. They were sharp, discomforting, and disturbingly wrong. When the transfer ended, I jolted back to reality, drenched in cold sweat. My hands were trembling, my heart racing. "Doctor?" Ramirez was watching me, confused. "Everything all right?" he asked, his voice shaky. I nodded, even though nothing was all right. I couldn't find the words to explain what I had just experienced. That creeping unease clung to me. I left the morgue, stepping back into a grey, stormy day. The sky rumbled with thunder, a perfect reflection of the turmoil brewing inside me. As I went through the motions of my daily routine, I started noticing things, small cracks in my perception. My vision distorted at random moments, as though the world itself was warping. Once I caught my reflection in a bodega mirror, but what stared back wasn't fully me. It was like my face had merged with someone else's, someone I couldn't recognize but felt terrifyingly familiar. The city itself began to shift around me. The shadows of people passing by seemed to dance and swirl unnaturally, their forms twisting into grotesque shapes that made my skin crawl. Sounds, too, became warped and dissonant. The constant hum of traffic, the murmur of voices, all of it assaulted my senses, sending my anxiety spiraling. Something from that transfer was trying to reach me, to communicate in a language I didn't understand. The memories I'd inherited, they weren't just pieces of another life, they were secrets, dark ones, and I couldn't decipher them. I wasn't sure if I was losing my mind or if these sensations were real. Every day felt like I was falling further into some kind of waking nightmare. Then there was the figure. It started as a feeling, that sense of being watched, but as I walked through the rain-soaked streets, it became more tangible. I'd catch glimpses of a shadow lurking in the corners of my vision, always just out of reach. The figure followed me, its presence heavy, like a weight pressing against my chest. I weaved through alleyways and side streets, trying to shake the feeling, but the figure remained. It was as if the city itself had conspired to lead me straight into his path. Every time I glanced over my shoulder, I half expected him to disappear, but he never did. One evening, after picking up a new round of prescriptions for my father, I spotted the figure again, this time more clearly. He stood in a dingy alley across the street, just watching. A flash of a memory hit me, but I couldn't place it fast enough. I couldn't remember where I'd seen him before. Frustrated and tired of running, I marched toward the alley, ready to confront this shadow that had been haunting me. But as soon as I got close, the figure vanished. It was like he'd dissolved into the subway fog, leaving me standing there in the rain, completely alone. I stood there, drenched and fuming. The alley was empty, no sign that anyone had ever been there. Had I imagined it? Was I losing my grip on reality? As I turned and walked away, I had to ask myself again, had the figure even been real? Or was it just another manifestation of my unraveling mind? The next morning, I woke with the remnants of a vivid dream lingering in my mind. In it, I stood outside a suburban house with a white picket fence. It was almost picture perfect, except for the overwhelming sense of dread that had gripped me in the dream. The yellow door stood out, as bright as a beacon. As I moved through my morning routine, the image of the house burned itself into my mind. I couldn't shake it. I couldn't stop thinking about it, even as I cared for my father. The house, with its pristine fence and yellow door, called to me. I had to find it. Something was waiting for me there, something I had to uncover. In a rare moment of respite, I found myself standing in front of the TV, hoping for a distraction. The usual noise of the news droned on, a background hum to my thoughts. But then, something caught my attention. The news anchor's voice crackled through the speakers, describing a heartwarming feature story. My pulse quickened as the image filled the screen. It was the house, the same one that had haunted my dreams. White picket fence, and that unmistakable yellow door. My heart pounded in my chest. I couldn't ignore the feeling that this house held some key to the mysteries swirling in my life. Without hesitation, I grabbed a pen, jotted down the address, and left my apartment, drawn by a force I couldn't explain. The subway ride felt like an eternity. I barely noticed the usual clamor of the city. My mind was fixed on the house, its yellow door looming larger in my imagination with each passing minute. When I finally stepped off the train, the air was different. Clean, crisp. The scent of freshly cut grass replaced the smog of the city. I had arrived in the suburbs. Everything here seemed too perfect. Manicured lawns, gleaming fences, houses with neatly painted shutters. The whole block exuded a sort of tranquility that felt foreign to me. Yet, as I walked deeper into the neighborhood, an eerie stillness settled over the street. No children playing, no dogs barking, just silence. Too much silence. The quiet unnerved me. It was as if the entire neighborhood had slipped into some kind of suspended animation. Curtains were drawn tight, doors locked, and the normally lively suburban streets were deserted. The absence of life weighed on me, making each step feel heavier. Finally, I arrived at the house from my dream. There it stood in all its unnerving familiarity, the same yellow door, bright against the dull grey sky. My hands trembled as I approached. Should I knock? What if someone was home? Or worse, what if the answers I sought were more than I was ready to uncover? I knocked, the sound loud and intrusive in the unnatural stillness. The seconds stretched on, each one ticking away like an eternity. No response. I swallowed hard, the knot in my stomach growing tighter. Instinct urged me forward, pushing me to the backyard, as if the house itself was guiding me. The backyard was overgrown, yet still eerily serene. In one corner, half hidden by tangled weeds, stood an old moss-covered statue. Something about it pulled me closer. I crouched down and, on impulse, lifted its stone base. Nestled beneath it was a key. Not just any key, but one with a familiar dot of red paint on its head. My fingers trembled as I held the key. This wasn't a coincidence. It was the same mark as the key I'd found before, the one that kept reappearing. My pulse quickened as I approached the door. Every part of me screamed that I knew this place, knew it from deep inside my mind. But how? With a deep breath, I slid the key into the lock. The door opened with a soft creak, and I stood on the threshold, staring into the dim interior of the house. This was the boundary, the line between the life I knew and the answers I had been chasing. I crossed it. The inside of the house was as quiet as the outside, steeped in the same heavy, unsettling stillness. Dust floated in the sunlight that filtered through closed curtains. I moved down the hallway, peeking into each room. Everything was in its place, as though the people who lived here had only just left. But no one was home. As I ventured further, the sense of unease grew stronger. The house felt lived in. There were signs of everyday life, but everything was frozen in time. I could almost hear the laughter, the conversations, feel the warmth of a life that once existed here. But I couldn't make sense of it. Who were these people? What did they have to do with me? In the study, my eyes fell on a cluttered desk, covered with papers, old photos and journals. One journal caught my eye, its cover worn and weathered with age. I opened it carefully and flipped through the pages. The handwriting was neat but faded, each word marked into the paper like a map of someone's thoughts, someone's life. The entries were fragmented, disjointed, but there was a pattern. A story was being told, but I couldn't quite piece it together. Something about loss, about regret, and then I saw it, the same yellow door sketched in the margins of the journal. This house, these people, they were connected to me in ways I couldn't yet understand. As I closed the journal, paranoia prickled at the back of my mind. What if the owner of the house returned? What if I had been seen? The house had led me here to this point, but for what reason? I stood in the middle of the study, surrounded by the remnants of a life that felt a million miles away from my own, yet inexplicably linked to me. What was I meant to find here? What truth was buried in these walls? The house remained silent, holding its secrets just out of my reach. I knew I had only scratched the surface. Something bigger, something darker was waiting for me, but for now, all I had were more questions. I was about to leave when a resounding knock echoed through the house. My entire body froze, my pulse spiking as I waited for a second knock, and there it was, confirming my suspicion. The sound seemed to call me, pulling me deeper into the house. Cautiously, I followed the rhythmic knocks, their steady beat guiding me toward a walk-in wardrobe tucked away in the corner of the master bedroom. I slowly pushed the door open. A dark, narrow space greeted me, barely illuminated. The knocks grew louder as I stepped inside, now coming from behind a rack of clothes. I carefully parted the hanging garments, revealing a hidden door embedded in the wall. I stood there for a moment, questioning if I really wanted to know what was beyond that door. Swallowing my fear, I twisted the knob and pushed. A flight of stairs stretched downward, disappearing into darkness. Each step I took creaked beneath me, the anticipation building with every footfall. I reached another door, its surface worn, as if time had taken its toll. My hand shook as it hovered over the knob, nerves buzzing under my skin. With a deep breath, I turned it and slowly pushed the door open. A small room met me. Bleak retro wallpaper clung to the walls, and a row of monitors cast an eerie light over everything. My eyes were instantly drawn to a figure seated in front of the monitors, his back turned to me. It was him, the Watcher. His long hair fell over his shoulders just like I remembered. He was sharpening something, a tool, maybe, with that same methodical rasping sound I'd heard before. For a split second, he didn't notice me. Time seemed to hang in the air. But then, his head whipped around, his eyes locked on mine, cold and terrifying. Panic surged through me. Without thinking, I bolted. I didn't wait for him to move, didn't wait to see what he would do. I just ran. My legs carried me up the stairs, through the bedroom, my breath ragged and loud in my ears. I couldn't shake the image of him, the feeling of his eyes burning into my back. I didn't stop until I burst through the front door, out into the empty street. I didn't dare look back. Certain he was still watching me, following me with his gaze. I ran. The once calm, quiet neighborhood now felt menacing, its silence suffocating. My sneakers hit the pavement hard as I pushed myself farther and farther away from that house. Only when I was safely out of sight, far from the reach of that house and the Watcher, did I slow down. Leaning against a lamppost, I gasped for air, my heart pounding. My mind was a whirlwind of fear, questions, and the haunting memory of that room. I don't know how long I stood there before I finally made my way back into the city, back to the one place that always gave me comfort, the bar. I stepped inside, the atmosphere familiar, comforting. For a moment, I felt like I could breathe again. I slid onto a stool at the bar, and almost immediately, a woman approached me with a warm smile. Her eyes sparkled with a strange kind of recognition. "Steve." "It's been a few days," she said, her voice filled with warmth. I blinked at her, my mind scrambling to place her face, but nothing came. I couldn't remember her. Not her name, not her face, nothing. "I'm sorry," I said, trying to smile, though I knew it probably looked forced. "Are you new here?" Her smile faltered for a moment, concern flickering in her eyes. She reached out and gently touched my arm. "It's me, Steve. It's Maggie." My heart sunk. No, it couldn't be. This wasn't my Maggie. My Maggie had different hair, a different face, a completely different presence. She was my anchor, the one constant in this disorienting world. I searched the woman's face, desperate for any spark of recognition, but nothing came. "I'm sorry," I whispered, barely able to meet her eyes. "You must have me confused with someone else. I don't know who you think I am." Her smile faded completely, replaced by sadness. She pulled her hand away. "I understand," she said softly, almost to herself, I thought. "Well, never mind." "Ah." She turned and walked away, leaving me there to wrestle with the strange, unsettling encounter. I watched her disappear into the crowd, but the unease lingered. Was I losing more of my memories? Were new ones replacing them without me even realizing? The noise of the bar resumed, but the warmth I'd always felt here was gone. It felt cold, empty. I glanced at the painting behind the bar, hoping for some sense of familiarity, but it wasn't the same one I remembered. It had been replaced by an image of a large bridge towering over a dark harbour. I downed the rest of my drink and stepped back into the night. Later, as I stood by the window of my apartment, gazing out over the city, I couldn't shake the weight pressing down on me. My mind felt scrambled. Everything inside me fractured, scattered. I didn't know who I could trust anymore, not even myself. And then, amidst the sea of shadows, I caught a flicker of movement. My gaze locked onto a figure standing in the window of the building across from me. The Watcher. The same presence that had stalked my every step, haunted my every move. His stare bored into me. Time seemed to stretch as our eyes met, the air between us thick with a strange, piercing intensity. Why was he following me? Was he a guardian, a sign of impending danger, or just a figment of my unraveling mind? But tonight, there was no mistaking it. He was real. He stood there, his presence undeniable in the stillness of the night. Something deep inside me snapped. I couldn't keep running. It was time to turn the tables, time to confront this enigma and rip the truth from his cold, unblinking gaze. I left my apartment without a second thought, descending the stairwell. The streets below were dark and silent, eerily silent, like the city itself was holding its breath. I crossed the street, heading for the building where the Watcher had stood, my resolve firm. As I stepped into the lobby, I paused, the calm before a storm. The warmth of the lobby felt wrong, almost out of place, given the emptiness that surrounded me. It was unsettling. Minutes ago, the hotel had seemed alive, but now it was deserted, silent, as if everyone had simply vanished. I stood in the center of the room, the flickering light above casting long, jagged shadows along the walls. Doubt clawed at me, but before I could turn back, a sound broke through the silence. A faint ding. My head snapped toward the elevator, just as the door slid open, revealing the silhouette of a dark figure. The Watcher had arrived. Everything seemed to slow as he stepped out, his presence instantly filling the room. My muscles tensed, every instinct screaming at me to run, but I was frouncing. The confrontation I had sought was here, and it was too late to escape. His eyes locked onto mine, unflinching, unwavering. He moved toward me with heavy steps, slow and methodical, his approach terrifying in its calmness. The closer he came, the more familiar his features became, tugging at something deep within my memory. There was something about him, something I should recognize, but I couldn't grasp it. When he finally stood just inches from me, the tension between us was unbearable. A surge of energy shot through me, nerves scrambling my thoughts. "Who are you?" I managed, my voice barely holding steady. "What do you want from me?" His lips curled into a smile, cold and chilling, his eyes gleaming with dark amusement. "Why don't we sit?" he murmured, his voice low and smooth. Without knowing why, I followed him. We settled into large chairs, facing each other in the quiet, empty lobby. The Watcher's gaze never wavered, those eyes of his seeming to see through every layer of me. "You seem like you've had a long day," he finally said, his voice calm. I swallowed hard, my throat tight as I nodded. I couldn't tear my eyes away from his face. "I couldn't help but notice," he continued, his voice laced with curiosity. "You seem a bit lost." His words sinking in, I frowned, confused. How could he possibly know what was going on inside my head? "I have a proposition for you, Steve," he said. My heart skipped a beat. How did he know my name? How do you know who I am?" I asked, my voice cracking under the weight of my own confusion. His smile widened, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Let's just say I know more than most," he replied, his tone maddeningly cryptic. I leaned back in my chair, trying to put some distance between us, even though I knew it wouldn't help. "What is it you want me to do?" I finally asked. The Watcher leaned in, his voice low as he made his request. "I need you to find someone for me," he said, "and I need you to do it discreetly. Questions swirled in my mind, but before I could ask, he slid a small envelope across the table, his eyes never leaving mine. "I need you to find this man," he explained. "And once you find what I'm looking for, I'll give you what you've been searching for." I reached for the envelope. Fingers shook as they closed around it tightly. I studied him, searching for any sign of deception. "How do I know I can trust you?" I asked. "How do I know this isn't some kind of trap?" The watcher leaned back, almost as if he'd expected my doubt. "You'll have to trust your instincts, Steve." His words echoed inside me. With a deep breath, I tore open the envelope and pulled out its contents, a single photograph. I stared at the image in disbelief. It was a picture of me. I sat there, frowned, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. My mind scrambled for an explanation as I finally looked up, meeting the watcher's gaze. "What is this?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "This is me." The watcher leaned forward, his expression serious. "Steve, I know this is hard to accept, but the truth is, you're not fully awake. You're in a coma." His words echoed through my mind, colliding with everything I thought I knew. "A coma," I repeated, my voice shaky, disbelief flooding every word. The watcher nodded, his tone calm and assured. "Yes. In order to wake you up, I created this construct, this world you're living in, to disrupt the intricate reality your mind has built. Everything here, every person, every place, every memory, is designed to keep you asleep. I'm here to bring you back." Denial surged within me, followed by fear and a flicker of hope. My mind trying to make sense of what he was saying. Could this be true? "Why?" I asked. "Why go to such lengths?" He leaned back, his eyes steady on mine. "I am your doctor," he said. "This construct, this treatment, is my attempt to wake you. It's the only way to bring you out of the coma and back to consciousness." I stared at him, the pieces of the puzzle slowly clicking into place. The gaps in my memories, the strangeness of the world around me, it all started to make sense. I had been trapped in my own mind, lost in a reality of my own making. "But I can't do this alone," the watcher continued, his voice soft but firm. "You have to trust me, Steve. Trust that I'm trying to help you. Follow my guidance, and we can navigate through this construct together. We'll find a way to bring you back to the real world." "Prove it," I muttered. "Prove that I'm in a coma." The watcher sighed, leaning forward slightly. "Okay, Steve. What's your father's name?" I opened my mouth to answer, but no words came out. Panic welled up inside me. What was my father's name? I tried to reach for it, but there was nothing, just an empty void. A wave of vulnerability washed over me, and for the first time, I truly felt lost. The watcher's gaze softened. "There are people waiting for you, Steve," he said gently. "People who care about you. Your family, your loved ones. They're waiting for you to come back. This journey isn't just for you. It's for them too." My breath slowed, though my mind still swirled. "What do I need to do?" I asked, my voice firm despite the confusion still gnawing at me. The watcher's smile widened slightly, just enough to be reassuring. "You have to seek out the truth hidden in this world," he said. "Every person you met, every step you took, it's all part of the puzzle that will lead you to waking up." I nodded, a part of me desperate to believe, knowing I had to face my fears if I was ever going to wake from this permanent dream. "I'm ready," I said. Determination flared in my eyes as I flipped the photo over. An address was scribbled on the back. The watcher gave a nod of approval. "Remember, trust your instincts. The path may seem uncertain, but you must rely on your intuition to discern the constructs from reality. It's all part of the process." Suddenly, I felt droplets of water hit the photo. I looked up, and in a blink, I found myself at the foot of the bridge, the one that had haunted my thoughts for so long. It loomed ahead, a massive structure stretching into the unknown. Everything inside me urged me to move forward, to step into the uncharted territory beyond. Yet I felt trapped, weighed down by invisible chains of doubt and anxiety. My eyes stayed locked on the misty horizon where the bridge vanished into nothingness. Time slowed. The very ground beneath me seemed to pulse with the rhythm of my anxiety. But then, I forced myself to take a hesitant step forward. The bridge felt solid, yet unstable beneath my feet, like walking on a tightrope above an abyss of fear. Memories swirled in my mind. Were they real or even mine? After a few steps I faltered, stopped by a wall of fear. The bridge became a mirror, reflecting every insecurity, every ghost that haunted me. I clenched my muscles, pushing forward despite it all. Doubt gnawed at me, fear twisted in my gut. But somewhere deep inside, a spark of determination kept me moving. The bridge seemed endless, a never-ending path. I closed my eyes briefly, searching for calm within the darkness. I opened my eyes again, and there in the mist stood a figure, a silhouette. Each step brought it into sharper focus, until I recognized it. Another vision guide, like the ones that had accompanied me before. Not a man, but a manifestation of my own mind, leading me forward. Realization hit me. This was part of the test, a piece of myself guiding me through. I had been here before. Understanding washed over me, unlocking the meaning of this journey. The end of the bridge was within sight now, close enough to reach. A new clarity settled over me. The fear that had paralyzed me was no longer a wall, it was a challenge to overcome. With every ounce of courage I could summon, I took deliberate steps forward. Each one echoed with a sense of purpose, a declaration that I was willing to face whatever lay ahead. The bridge creaked beneath me, but I didn't care anymore. I moved steadily, the distance between me and my destination closing with each step. What once seemed impossible now felt conquerable. Finally, I reached the other side, and exhilaration rushed through me. I had faced the fear that had held me back for so long. I turned, looking back at the bridge I had crossed. And then, something unexpected. There, in the middle of a quiet, empty road, stood a door. It was mysterious, out of place, yet it beckoned me forward, like a beacon in the silent town. Taking a deep breath, I approached the door, my hand reaching for the handle. It was locked. I instinctively reached into my pocket, pulling out the key that had followed me on this journey. Sliding it into the lock, I turned it. The door clicked open, revealing a dark void beyond. I stepped through, my senses alive with anticipation. As I crossed the threshold, the bridge disappeared behind me, and I found myself inside a building. The transition was seamless, as if I had always been here. The space stretched endlessly, dimly lit offices and corridors extending in every direction. The walls were lined with faded paintings and family photos, capturing memories. I moved deeper into the building, sensing a shift in the atmosphere. A door stood slightly ajar ahead of me. Intrigued, I approached and gently pushed it open. Inside, the room was bathed in a soft, golden light, warm and comforting, a stark contrast to the cold emptiness I had endured for so long. I scanned the space, shelves lined with old books, a vintage typewriter on a desk, and an ornate mirror that reflected back at me more clearly than anything I'd ever seen. Through the window I could see a beach, so close I could almost feel the sand beneath my feet. Then, at the heart of the room, I saw it. A key lying on the desk beside a pile of papers. I stepped closer, my eyes drawn to the key. As I reached for it, I noticed a small dab of green nail polish on the surface. I froze. The moment my fingers touched the key, the room began to shake. Light erupted from every corner, growing brighter, more intense. The walls trembled, the air hummed with an electric energy. But I didn't flinch. For once I wasn't afraid. The light grew blinding, impossibly bright, and a smile crept onto my face. "What's that beeping?" And then... What if the noises you hear at night aren't just your imagination? Do you believe in curses? I didn't consider myself a superstitious person. I didn't believe in the paranormal, and generally considered the ramblings of superstition to be more like modern mythology. People just taking allegories of concepts and held beliefs and trying to give them solid meaning and agency by attaching some force to it that moves beyond the belief of what our own eyes can see. Recent events, though, have forced me to reconsider my beliefs on the paranormal. What I have come to learn and to fear is that not believing in superstition might not change how it can affect you. Despite not believing this sort of thing myself, I might have to start. See, I think I might be cursed. Silly thing for a skeptic to say, I know, but I will tell you the story of the last few days, and maybe you can tell me if it sounds like I am or not. Maybe I am just being paranoid. The tragedy of recent events having drowned my skeptical mind in a wave of the paranormal beliefs of others, though I fear the nagging feeling that it could be real. If this is all real, then I think I'm in trouble. 2 weeks ago, my girlfriend Heather and I were on the way to a somber event. It was the funeral service of her best friend Gwen, and she was trying her best to compose herself, but having a hard time. "I don't know if I can do this," she said for the third time since we had departed, her sleeve wet with tears before we had even arrived. I tried my best to comfort her, but she was taking the loss of her friend hard. "It will be okay, honey. I know it's hard all of this has been, but I know she would have wanted you to be there to remember her, along with all her other friends and family." I told her that, not really knowing if it was true, since I did not know much about her friend Gwen before she had passed so suddenly. I put a reassuring hand on her shoulder, without diverting too much attention from driving through the light traffic in the small town the service was held at. "I know, I just can't believe she is gone," she said while wiping her eyes a final time as we arrived at the funeral home. It was a gloomy day outside. Clouds shrouded any possible rays of sunshine. The sky threatened rain, yet was not quite ready to unleash the downpour. Very fitting day for a funeral, I thought to myself, and I opened Gwen's door and helped her out of the car. We stepped out and saw a large group of people in dark-colored clothes gathered near the entrance. Moving towards the group, Heather noticed Gwen's parents and suppressed another sob. I tried to reassure her again, and we moved to greet them and express our condolences. It was tough seeing the pained resolve on their faces, as many cried around them, but they did their best to stay composed and thank each person for coming. The service had not started yet, but apparently the viewing had. We were told to head inside and to pay our respects and view the body if we wished, or to just write a memorial note. Heather decided she was feeling strong enough to go to the viewing, and I held her hand as we entered. There were others there softly crying or solemnly looking on in quiet respect. 2 individuals caught my eye, though. I supposed Gwen's family was religious, but these 2 looked a bit extreme. They were wearing some sort of religious regalia and holding crucifixes. They seemed to hold them up and mutter some sort of prayer. Not too odd if they were priests or something, but it got strange when I heard something whispered quietly about how the Lord banishes all evil, and through his light we ask for an end to this bloody reaping. We pray for forgiveness. The robed figures finished the chant and made the sign of the cross one last time and left the body and the viewing room, looking back at us as they left in an oddly paranoid way, like they did not trust something about us being in the room. I brushed it off, and Heather did not seem to notice or care about the strange priests or whatever they were, or the weird sermon about evil they seemed to have had with her friend's body. We approached the coffin slowly, and Heather began crying again. I looked down into the finely carved casket and saw her. The embalming process always alters the look of people, no matter how skilled they are. It's just not quite them anymore. I felt terrible for Heather and how she lost her friend, and I felt even worse for Gwen, of course. To have a heart attack at 34 was a genuine tragedy. She had had no underlying health issues of note and lived a fairly active and healthy lifestyle, so it was even more puzzling to everyone who had known her. I had been holding Heather's hand, but as we stepped closer, she broke away and reached down and touched the hand of her friend and said her last goodbyes. I looked on and felt moved by the touching scene, and felt a shade of the deep sadness that she had felt for her lost friend. In my sympathetic reverie, I received a sudden flash of deep and profound sadness, which I thought made sense. What I was not prepared for was what felt like a strange buzzing tension in the air, and a feeling of unbridled anger, like when a furious person is staring someone else down. I looked over my shoulders and across the room, but no one else was in there with us at that moment. Then I felt a strange pain in the back of my ears, almost like they were suddenly ready to pop. It felt very strange, but I had no idea what was happening. I was just standing there unmoving, looking at Heather hold her friend's hand and say her goodbyes. Then I noticed her hand and saw something disturbing. As Heather held Gwen's right hand, I noticed what may have been an oversight by the makeup and mortuary workers who were supposed to prepare the bodies for viewing. There were fairly pronounced scratches in irregular patterns on the top portions of her fingers. They were initially hard to see, but were definitely there, down about halfway on each digit. I had a strange fancy that they brightened and thrummed in time with the disturbing feeling in the air, and I did not like the weird synchrony. I moved closer to try and put a hand on Heather's shoulder, but suddenly the bubble popped, and the pressure in my head exploded as it felt like both my eardrums popped, and the blinding headache almost made me cry out. Before I could, though, I heard Heather cry out first, not in grief but in pain. She was startled out of her own grieving by the pain of something, and she clutched her own right hand and looked down at a small but deep cut on her right index finger. It was bleeding a good bit for how small it seemed, and I quickly grabbed some tissues nearby and helped her cover it. What happened? Was there something sharp left in her casket? I asked her, while still holding her hand and trying to steady her. I don't know, there was nothing there. I was just holding her hand. Her poor hand. Whoever did her makeup and preparation should be ashamed. She hated that color, and whatever it was in there cut her hand as well. Heather responded, looking on the verge of crying again and trying to distract her grief with temporary anger over the thought of her best friend's preparation not being perfect. We both saw another group waiting to enter and realized our time was up, so we exited the viewing room. I was able to get a band-aid from the car's first aid kit for Heather's cut. By that time, it had stopped bleeding even though it looked disturbingly deep. I bandaged it anyway and disinfected it just to be safe, and Heather let out another whimper of pain. I apologized profusely and we composed ourselves and went to the main hall for the ceremony. The main service was set to start in about 20 minutes, but we never Saturday for the service we had to leave about 10 minutes later. We were settled in, and I thought we would be okay. But I heard Heather quietly mumble, "Not now, not now." I asked her if she was all right, and she groaned in pain again and held a hand to her forehead. "No, not right now. I can't do it. I need to go. We need to go." She stood up, grabbed my arm, and we left. Not too many people noticed us leaving since we were close to the back, but I shot an apologetic look at those who did. Rushing through the hall, I noticed the robbed figures again, and they seemed to regard Heather and I with a new apprehension, and they cleared out of our way and crossed themselves as we moved quickly down the hall and past them. We moved quickly since Heather was pulling me along, but as we departed, I thought I heard one of them say something in Latin or something. It sounded like maledictionem. We rounded the corner, and I realized where she had been rushing. She had made it to the restroom and promptly went in, and I heard vomiting followed by sobbing, and then the sink running and the door opening again. It's a migraine right now of all times. It is so bad I can barely see straight, and I puked at Gwen's funeral. I can't believe this. We can't stay, we have to go. I can't do this now. I said my goodbye to her. We have to go. I am so sorry, Gwen, Heather said, while she continued to cry and clutch her head. I held her arm and we quickly moved back out to the car and headed home. On the way home, the sky finally decided to open up and a torrential rain began. Despite the pounding of the rain on the car, I could not hear much over Heather's anguished moaning. I did not know what was worse for her at that moment, the migraine or the sadness over her friend. Yet despite the professed agony of the migraine, she seemed to be holding her hand like it was still wounded, and in particular the finger that had been cut in Gwen's casket. I thought it was strange, but she seemed to writhe in pain, like that small cut hurt worse than her migraine. I was so distracted by the scene I almost rear-ended a car in front of me, and I had to slam on the brakes. I apologized to Heather and asked if she was okay, but just held her hand on her face and did not seem to notice the jarring stop we had come to. Something was off. She was normally terrified of traffic and driving in the rain, but barely noticed when we almost got into a crash. We arrived home and Heather went straight to bed and fell into a fitful sleep. Outside, the rain had become a full thunderstorm and was raging, strong winds picking up as well. I was afraid the power might go out, so I started looking for some candles or flashlights. The twilight hour mixed with the pressing storm gave the outside look a disturbing, hellish red quality that seemed an eerie nightcap to the day's disturbing and sad events. Heather had stayed asleep, and I was about to join her when I heard screaming from upstairs, and I rushed up to check on her. Heather was bolt upright, panting and heaving and clutching her hand. She started whimpering and saying, "I'm sorry, Gwen. I'm sorry, I didn't know. Not us, please, not us." Over and over. I sat down and reached across the bed to try and comfort her, but when I touched her shoulder, she whirled around and struck my hand, and for a moment she had a distorted and deranged appearance on her face. The next second she recovered and looked confused and horrified that she had just struck me, and proceeded to apologize repeatedly to me, and then back to Gwen again. I had no idea what was going on, but I was getting worried about her mental health. As she finally settled back down, she rolled over and fell back asleep, and I tried to settle in and ignore that nagging feeling that something was very wrong. I know everyone grieves differently, but the way she had been acting was worrying. I hoped that tomorrow would be better. I was about to drift off when I heard a disturbing sound that made my stomach turn. It sounded sort of like fingernails cutting into skin. It was faint at first, but eventually I realized it was coming from Heather, and I sat up and hopped out of bed and slowly moved around to her side to get a look at her prone form, rolled over facing the opposite way. To my horror, she still seemed asleep, but was unconsciously scratching deep cuts into her right middle finger with the nails on her left. The old cut had been opened as well, and her hand was bleeding profusely again. "Oh my God! Heather, wake up!" I shouted, and shook her shoulders, and she woke with a scream. Before she knew what was happening, I had a towel in hand and was covering her bleeding fingers. "What happened? I thought I was asleep," she mumbled out in a dazed, dreamy-sounding voice, seemingly oblivious to any pain caused by the self-mutilation. I had no idea how she had not known she was doing that, or how she couldn't feel it. She was showing a disturbing degree of dissociation since she had come back from the funeral, and I was worried she might be having a mental breakdown. I brought some first aid supplies and went to clean her wounds. When I went to disinfect and bandage her fingers, I saw an odd and seemingly deliberate pattern that had been carved onto the fingertips. I don't know how, but it looked disturbingly familiar. I took a picture of the morbid design and tried showing it to her. When I showed her the work she had done to her own finger, she merely said, "Oh, that's what that was." Then, as if uninterested by the conversation, she fell asleep again. Nothing about this was right. I needed to see what was happening with Heather. The next day was worse, and Heather woke up with a very high fever. I tried to give her medicine for it, and she seemed weirdly mistrustful and would slap the Tylenol out of my hands and stare at me as if I had just tried to kill her. "I know what you are trying to do, I know," she muttered, though not looking at me when she spoke. Despite the accusation and look, she seemed to be talking to herself or someone else and not me. I decided to call her parents and see if they could talk to her and help. It was strange though, since the line seemed to be dead when I called on both of our phones. I called her sister as well, and no answer. It was getting weirder and weirder. The storm had hardly abated outside, and I was concerned about leaving Heather in this state and venturing out into the tempest to get her help. She lay on the couch, feverish and rambling, and staring weirdly at her hands for minutes at a time. I tried to let her rest, but as the storm picked up outside, I saw her visibly sweating, and I took her temperature, and it was 105 degrees. I had to get her fever down, so I tried to wake her to take some medicine and run a cool shower for her. Heather's eyes blinked open, and a hazy look had glossed over her entire face as she sat up and struck me in the head, knocking down the offered medicine again. Not again, no more, not upon us," she started ranting and screaming at me. I tried to calm her down, but she hurled a nearby chair at me, and I had to flee the living room and run upstairs while trying to talk to her and de-escalate. Despite my attempts at reaching her, she did not seem to be listening to me or anyone in the room, just some other perceived being. She seemed to be alternating between directing her fury at something, then apologizing to it. "Why did you leave? Why did you do this to me? It's not fair. Why her? Why me?" She screamed ever louder until falling silent and collapsing on the floor. I needed help. Something was very wrong. I did not know if this was a psychotic break or if the fever had addled her into a violent frenzy, but she needed help now, so I dialed 911 and called an ambulance. Mercifully, I got through and was able to call for help. After hanging up the phone, I looked back where I expected the prone form of Heather, only to find her bolt upright and carving her right hand with a kitchen knife. It was those creepy lines, She had slashed them on her remaining fingers and was holding up her hand in a bloody spectacle as if checking her work. She looked at me with a deranged smile that shifted to an agonized look of pure despair and said, "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, her, me, you, all of it. It is all going to end. No stopping it now." The air in the room became heavy, and the pressure in my head reminded me of how I felt when we were viewing Gwen at the service. My head ached, my teeth hurt, and I sat there paralyzed with dread, watching Heather hyperventilate and look at her ruined hand, until suddenly the air swept out of the room and my eardrums burst, and Heather fell to the floor. Her eyes were open, and she was not breathing. I held her hand and tried to perform CPR on her, yet to no avail. She was dead before emergency services arrived. I sat in disbelief next to her lifeless form, holding her hand and crying. I was in utter shock. How could she have died? When the EMTs arrived, they tried to resuscitate but were unsuccessful. It was declared as a cardiac failure. That was all they could surmise as for what could have killed her. A heart attack, just like Gwen. When they moved her away and placed her on the gurney, I felt a sharp pain on my hand, and I realized that her nails must have scratched my finger or something, as I looked down at my right index finger and saw a bloody line formed near the top down past the nail in a disturbing pattern that caught my eye. I was barely able to give my statement over the blinding headache I had developed. Despite the shock, grief and general horror of the events that unfolded before me, I was suddenly very tired. When the emergency services had left, I felt so overwhelmed by the tragedy of what I had experienced that I collapsed into a heap on the couch and passed out. I had horrible dreams while I slept, of Gwen and Heather out under the red stormy sky, calling to me. I felt the terrible pressure in the air and that feeling of unbridled anger. I saw flashes of the strange priests and the word they whispered, maledictionem. That was last night. When I awoke from the horrible dreams, I came to a disturbing realization. This cut, it is like the cut that Heather had. She held Gwen's hand, and in a few days she was dead as well. I don't know what the hell is happening, but I am even more disturbed by the word that those priests spoke, maledictionem. It turns out it was Latin after all, and what it roughly translates to is the curse. I can scarcely believe it. Does this mean they thought this is some sort of death curse? No, that's impossible. I'm just letting the grief and trauma of the last few days color my reality with nonsense. Yet as I write this, my head is getting foggy again, and I fear what will happen to me next. Grief can make us experience terrible things. It can drive us mad, and it can reap a physical toll. I know it's grief over losing her in such a terrible way. I can't believe she is gone. I can't physically cope, that's all. I am destroyed emotionally, but I will be okay. Curses can't be real, no. The grief is real. I will manage. Everything will be okay. Somehow. Sorry, I will need to update everyone another time. I need to clean myself up. I managed to get a terrible paper cut on my middle finger, and it is bleeding a lot. It's funny, I never thought a paper cut could look so strange. It almost matches the other scratch, and it looks oddly familiar. The clock on the wall of Rosie's diner ticked steadily, its hands inching closer to the end of another night shift. The small, sleepy town of Pine Hollow was mostly quiet by this hour, its streets empty and its residents tucked away in their beds. The hum of the refrigerator, the occasional clink of a coffee cup, and the low murmur of the old radio in the corner were the only sounds that kept me company. It was just past 3 a.m., and I was finishing up my nightly routine, wiping down the counters, stacking the chairs, and preparing the diner for the morning crew. I'd worked the night shift at Rosie's for nearly a year, and by now, I was used to the solitude that came with it. Most nights, the silence was comforting, a time for me to collect my thoughts and enjoy the peace that came with the late hours. But tonight felt different. There was a heaviness in the air, a stillness that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I couldn't quite place it, but something was off. As I wiped down the last table, I heard it, a distant, mournful whistle that echoed through the streets. I paused, my hand frozen mid-wipe, and listened. The whistle was faint, but it sent a shiver down my spine. It was a sound I had never heard before, Not in all my nights working here. I walked over to the window and peered out into the darkness. The street outside was empty, the only light coming from the flickering street lamp on the corner. But as I stood there, listening, the whistle came again, closer this time, louder. It was unmistakably the sound of a train, but there were no tracks near Pine Hollow. The nearest train line was miles away, and it certainly didn't run through the middle of town. Yet, as I strained my ears, I could hear the faint chugging of a steam engine, the rhythmic clatter of wheels on tracks. A sense of unease settled over me. I stepped outside, the cool night air hitting my face as I scanned the empty street. The sound of the train grew louder, as if it were approaching, but there was nothing. No tracks, no train, just the empty road and the silent buildings. And then, as the clock struck 3:15 a.m., I saw it. A ghostly train materialized out of the darkness, its form hazy and indistinct, like a mirage. The train was old, its engine a relic from a bygone era, billowing steam that dissipated into the night. The cars were dimly lit, their windows flickering with an eerie bluish light. I stood there, rooted to the spot, unable to tear my eyes away from the phantom train as it rumbled past the diner. The whistle sounded again, a mournful wail that echoed through the streets, and I felt a strange pull, a compulsion to follow the train, to board it. I shook my head, trying to clear my thoughts, but the pull was strong, almost irresistible. My feet began to move on their own, carrying me toward the train as it slowed to a stop just beyond the diner. The doors of one of the cars creaked open, revealing a dark, shadowy interior. For a moment I felt a surge of panic, a voice in the back of my mind screaming at me to turn back, to run. But the pull was too strong, the compulsion too overwhelming. And then, just as I was about to step forward, the train began to move again. The doors slammed shut, and the engine roared to life, picking up speed as it disappeared into the darkness. The whistle blew one last time, fading into the night as the train vanished from sight. I stood there, trembling, my heart pounding in my chest. The street was silent once more, as if the train had never been there. But I knew what I had seen, and I knew it wasn't just a figment of my imagination. The phantom train was real, and it had almost claimed me. The next day at Rosie's Diner was a blur. I went through the motions of my shift, serving customers, refilling coffee cups, and taking orders, but my mind was elsewhere. The memory of the phantom train haunted me, replaying in my mind over and over again. The eerie whistle, the ghostly engine, the overwhelming compulsion to board. It all felt like a nightmare, but I knew it had been real. I tried to push the thoughts aside, to focus on my work, but it was no use. The train had left a mark on me, a lingering sense of unease that I couldn't shake. I found myself glancing at the clock more often, dreading the approach of 3:15 a.m. As the night wore on, I grew more anxious. I kept looking out the window, half expecting to see the train again, but the streets remained empty. The regular customers trickled out one by one, leaving me alone in the diner as the hour grew late. By the time 3 a.m. rolled around, the diner was silent once more. I busied myself with cleaning, trying to distract myself from the growing dread in the pit of my stomach. But as the minutes ticked by, I couldn't ignore the feeling that something was coming, something inevitable. The clock on the wall chimed softly, signaling the arrival of 3:15 a.m. I froze, my breath catching in my throat, and listened. At first, there was nothing, just the low hum of the diner's lights and the faint buzz of the refrigerator. But then, faint and distant, I heard it, the mournful whistle of the phantom train. I rushed to the window, my heart pounding in my chest. The street outside was empty, just as it had been the night before. But the sound of the train grew louder, echoing through the streets, and I felt that same pull, that same compulsion to follow. And then, out of the darkness, the train appeared once more. It materialized in front of the diner, just as it had the previous night, its ghostly form shimmering in the dim light. The whistle blew again, and I felt the pull intensify, drawing me closer to the door. I knew I shouldn't go outside, shouldn't get closer to the train, but the compulsion was too strong. My feet moved on their own, carrying me toward the door. I reached for the handle, my hand trembling, and stepped outside. The train was slowing to a stop, just as it had the night before. The doors of one of the cars creaked open, revealing the dark interior. I took a step forward, the pull almost unbearable now, as if some unseen force was dragging me toward the train. But this time, I resisted. I planted my feet firmly on the ground, forcing myself to stay put. The train's whistle wailed again, a desperate, mournful sound that seemed to call to me, but I didn't move. The doors remained open for a moment longer, as if waiting for me to board, and then, with a loud clang, they slammed shut. The engine roared to life, and the train began to move, picking up speed as it disappeared into the darkness once more. I stood there, gasping for breath, my heart racing. The street was silent again, but the pull, the compulsion to follow, still lingered, a nagging feeling in the back of my mind. I knew I couldn't keep resisting the train's call forever. It would return, and each time the pull would be stronger, harder to resist. I needed to find out what the train wanted, why it was appearing to me, and why I felt so drawn to it. I had to uncover the truth before it was too late. The next morning, I decided to ask around town. Pine Hollow was small, and most of the residents knew each other's business. If the phantom train was real, if it had been seen before, surely someone would know something. I started with the regulars at the diner, those who had lived in Pine Hollow their whole lives. But when I mentioned the train, they just gave me puzzled looks, shaking their heads as if I was talking nonsense. No one had ever heard of a train passing through town, let alone a ghostly one. Frustrated but undeterred, I decided to visit the local library. The town's history was well documented there, and if the phantom train had any connection to Pine Hollow's past, I was determined to find it. The library was a small, quiet building near the center of town. Mrs. Henderson, the elderly librarian, greeted me with a warm smile as I walked in. She'd known me since I was a kid, and she was always happy to help with whatever I needed. "Good morning, dear," she said, peering at me over her glasses. "What brings you here today?" "I'm looking for information about the town's history," I said, trying to keep my voice casual. "Specifically, anything about trains or railroads that might have run through here." Mrs. Henderson frowned thoughtfully. "Well, there's never been a train line through Pine Hollow as far as I know. The nearest tracks are miles away, but I can show you some old records and see if there's anything that might help." She led me to a back room filled with dusty filing cabinets and old books. As she sorted through the files, I glanced around, taking in the musty smell of old paper and the quiet hum of the overhead lights. After a few minutes, Mrs. Henderson handed me a stack of old newspaper clippings and historical documents. "These are from the early 1900s, she said. "There was a lot of development in the area back then, and it's possible there was talk of building a railroad. You might find something useful here." I thanked her and sat down at one of the tables, spreading out the documents in front of me. Most of the articles were about the town's early settlers, local businesses, and the construction of the main roads. But then I found something that caught my eye, a headline from 1912 that read, "Tragedy strikes at Pine Hollow Station." The article described a terrible accident that had occurred during the construction of a small train station on the outskirts of town. The station was part of a new rail line that was supposed to connect Pine Hollow to the larger towns nearby. But before the line could be completed, a train carrying construction workers derailed, killing everyone on board. The project was abandoned after the accident, and the half-built station was left to decay. Over time, the story of the accident faded into local legend, and eventually, the station and the tracks were forgotten. As I read the article, a chill ran down my spine. Could this be connected to the phantom train? Was the train that had appeared to me somehow tied to the tragedy that had occurred over a century ago? I needed to know more. I searched through the rest of the documents, but there was no further mention of the train or the station. It was as if the town had erased the memory of the tragedy, burying it beneath years of forgotten history. But I wasn't about to give up. I decided to visit the site of the old station, hoping to find some clue that would help me understand the train's connection to the past. The site of the old station was on the outskirts of town, hidden away in a thick forest that had grown up around it over the years. I drove as far as I could, then parked my car and continued on foot, following the directions from the article. The forest was dense and overgrown, the path barely visible beneath the tangled underbrush. As I pushed my way through the trees, I felt a growing sense of unease. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, and the only sound was the rustling of the wind through the branches. After what felt like an eternity, I finally emerged into a small clearing. There, half buried beneath the undergrowth, were the remnants of the old station. The wooden platform had long since rotted away, and the tracks were rusted and twisted, barely recognizable beneath the moss and vines that had overtaken them. I walked around the clearing, searching for any sign of the train or the accident that had occurred here. But there was nothing, just the silent ruins of a forgotten project abandoned to time. But then, as I was about to give up, I saw it. A small, weathered plaque, half hidden beneath a pile of leaves. I brushed away the debris and squinted at the faded lettering. In memory of those who lost their lives on this site, May 15th, 1912, their spirits shall forever ride the rails. A shiver ran down my spine as I read the inscription. The connection was clear. The phantom train was somehow tied to the spirits of those who had died in the accident, forever bound to the tracks that had claimed their lives. But why had the train appeared to me? Why was I being drawn to it? As I pondered these questions, the air around me seemed to grow colder, and the light began to fade. I glanced at my watch. It was 3 p.m., still hours away from sunset. But the shadows were lengthening, and a thick mist was beginning to rise from the ground, swirling around the trees like ghostly tendrils. The pull I had felt the past 2 nights returned, stronger than ever. It tugged at my chest, urging me to stay, to wait for the train to appear. I could almost hear the whistle, faint and distant, echoing through the trees. But I knew better than to stay. I turned and hurried back the way I had come, fighting against the pull with every step. The mist thickened around me, the trees closing in, but I pushed on, desperate to escape the clearing. Finally, I broke free of the forest and stumbled back to my car, gasping for breath. The pull had lessened, but it was still there, a nagging sensation in the back of my mind, urging me to return. But I knew I couldn't go back. Not yet. I needed to know more, needed to understand what the train wanted from me before I could face it again. I drove back to town, my mind racing with questions. What was the connection between the train and the accident? Why was I being drawn to it? And most importantly, how could I break the pull before it claimed me as its next victim? That night, I returned to Rosie's diner, determined to stay away from the phantom train. I had made up my mind to quit the night shift and leave Pine Hollow for good. Whatever the train wanted, I wasn't going to let it take me. But as the clock ticked closer to 3:15 a.m., I felt the pull again, stronger than ever. It was as if the train knew I was trying to escape, and it wasn't going to let me go. The whistle sounded, louder than before, echoing through the diner. I gripped the edge of the counter, trying to resist, but the compulsion was too strong. My feet moved on their own, carrying me to the door. I stepped outside, the cold night air biting at my skin. The train was already there, waiting for me, its ghostly form shimmering in the darkness. The doors creaked open, and the pull became unbearable. I knew I couldn't fight it any longer. I took a deep breath and stepped toward the train, my heart pounding in my chest. The mist swirled around me, the air thick with the scent of steam and smoke. As I approached the train, I felt a strange sense of calm. The fear and dread that had plagued me for days seemed to fade away, replaced by a sense of inevitability. This was my fate. There was no escaping it. I climbed aboard the train, the door slamming shut behind me. The interior was dark, the only light coming from the flickering lamps that lined the walls. The seats were old and worn, the upholstery torn and faded, but there was no one else on board, just me and the ghostly presence that filled the car. The train began to move, the wheels clattering on the tracks as it picked up speed. I sat down, my hands trembling, and stared out the window. The town of Pine Hollow passed by in a blur, the lights flickering in the distance. And then, as the train sped through the night, the truth hit me. The train wasn't taking me away, it was bringing me back. back to the moment of the accident, back to the place where it all began. The mist outside the window thickened, and the train's whistle wailed, a mournful sound that echoed through the darkness. I felt the pull grow stronger, drawing me deeper into the past, into the tragedy that had claimed so many lives. The train hurtled forward, the landscape outside warping and twisting. The world around me faded, replaced by the dark, shadowy figures of the passengers who had died in the accident. They were all there, their faces pale and lifeless, their eyes empty. And then I saw it, the moment of the crash. The train derailed, the cars tumbling off the tracks, the sound of metal screeching against metal filling the air. The passengers screamed, their voices lost in the chaos. And then silence. The train slowed to a stop, the ghostly passengers fading into the mist. I was alone again, the car empty and silent. The pull was gone, replaced by a deep, overwhelming sadness. The train had brought me here to witness its final moments, to show me the tragedy that had bound it to the tracks for all eternity. And now, it was over. The train began to move again, slowly this time, carrying me back to Pine Hollow. The mist cleared, the town coming back into view. The whistle sounded one last time, a final farewell, as the train came to a stop in front of the diner. The doors creaked open, and I stepped off the train, the cold night air hitting my face. The train was gone, the tracks empty once more. I stood there for a moment, staring at the spot where the train had been, the pull finally gone. The clock on the diner's wall struck 3:30 a.m., and the world around me was silent. The phantom train had claimed its last victim. Its journey was over, its passengers finally at rest. And I too was free. With that said, thanks for watching, and until next time, stay safe and beware of the shadows lurking in the dark.